The gospel is from John, the 15th chapter. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends, if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands, so that you may love one another." Here ends the reading. Do you know why, and I just lost my sermon. Oh, here we go. Okay. You'll have to pay attention enough, even if I have these in order. So, do you know why the chewing gum and candy bars at the grocery store checkouts are low to the ground and kind of create a narrow gauntlet to go through? That display is a marketing tactic to get parents to pay for candy put in the reach of children right before paying for groceries. The theory is that children will reach out for the candy, and half the time the parent will buy it instead of creating a scene. Well, a little while ago, I saw one example of that ploy failing. A woman with a young child was in front of me at a checkout at Harris Teeter, and the child, a boy of about 4, started to reach for a Hershey bar. And his mother said, "Honey, don't touch the candy." The little boy drew his hand back and after a few minutes looked up to see if Mom was observing, and then she wasn't, so he reached out again, but he was caught. "Tommy, I asked you not to touch the candy." And once again he drew his hand back. And after a few more seconds, he reached out quickly and grabbed a Snickers bar. And his mother stooped down and in a firm but gentle voice, and very gentle, I think, under the circumstances, said, "I asked you not to take the candy. Please put it back." Now, maybe he was remorseful, but my cynical side said he was playing her. And he said, "Mommy, I love you." And she replied, "I know, honey, and I love you too, but if you love me, please do as I ask." Well, that gets us a good ways down the road to today's gospel lesson. Jesus is in the middle of his farewell sermon with his disciples in the upper room. If ever Jesus had been in doubt about how all of this would end, he is no longer. And so it's time to tell his inner circle what's most important before he takes those final steps to the cross. And what does he say? "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you." John also reminds us what love in the flesh can do. Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends. And after Jesus shared those words with his close friends in the upper room, he went out and he lived those words by taking his love to the cross. After that, Love can no longer be something that is defined by tender tears in a soap opera or syrupy lines in a Hallmark card. Love is not that warm feeling in your chest. Love is what we do. Love is the hard work of following the commands of Christ. And clearly, following those commands will sometimes mean that we will sacrifice something, probably something of ourselves, maybe even something precious. But notice in Jesus' words that he does not ask that his love be returned to him. Now that's what we would do, isn't it? See how much I love you? How about loving me back? Instead, Jesus asks that the love that he shared with his disciples not be returned, but that it be shared among them with each other. And again, Jesus is not just talking about a smile or an occasional kind word. If you are my friend, you will be ready to sacrifice yourself for a brother or a sister. That's love, and it's hard. Jesus loved us with that kind of love, and it was hard work. He gave up his life for us, and he calls us to do the same, to love others in this church, in our families, in our neighborhoods, and in the world with the sacrificial love with which he first loved us. Some years ago, I was on a planning committee for a statewide Lutheran youth retreat, and I had heard about a Wake Forest student who had just returned from working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and that she had quite a story to tell. And so I invited her to speak, not really knowing much else about her. And then at the retreat, one evening, she came to the podium. She was shy and she was tiny, but she had a powerful story that held 200 high school youth entranced and still for 45 minutes on a cold concrete gym floor. Alice Ann, not her real name, she said she wanted to go work for Mother Teresa since she was a little girl. And as she grew up, she wrote to the old nun several times. And when Alice Ann was a sophomore at Wake Forest, she got a letter. Mother Teresa wanted Alice Ann to come work with her and the other Sisters of Charity on the streets of Calcutta for a summer, maybe more. Well, you know how it is when a fantasy that you have lived with for a while becomes real. It's wonderful and it's scary. When your dream remains a fantasy, you can make it turn out the way you want. You succeed. People honor your sacrifice and dedication. You change the world. But when reality intrudes, things can get pretty messy. And that's the way it was for Alice Ann. So at the end of her junior year, she got up, she finished her year, and then she got on the plane to Calcutta, India, and she was filled with both excitement and fear. She arrived and had a few days of orientation, and then quickly had her first opportunity to be part of Mother Teresa's daily walks through the streets, seeking out the dying in the gutters of Calcutta. And it was awful. The stink was unbearable. It was too hot by mid-morning. And Mother Teresa apparently noticed none of it. As they walked, her eyes were constantly moving and searching. And at one point, they passed a huge pile of steaming refuse. And Mother Teresa laid a leathery hand on Alice Ann's arm and said, "My dear, go to that pile with the sisters and pick up that poor woman." Well, Alice Ann looked where she pointed and could not see anything, but she followed the sisters. And she didn't see the naked brown woman until she was close enough to touch her. And the sisters picked her up, and the woman let out a wail that Alice Ann could not even connect with a human sound. In fact, hard as she tried, she could not make her head understand that before her was in fact a human being. And Mother Teresa said to her, "You must help." And so with the greatest of effort, Alice Ann put her smooth white hands around this woman's scabby, oozing ankles, and then together they carried her back to the hospital, which was really more of a dormitory for the dying. Over the next days, Alice Ann cleaned the woman's wounds and changed her bed often so that she would always have clean white sheets. And she had to make herself do it. At first, it was painfully hard. She had to feed the woman a kind of nutritional gruel with a spoon because the woman was too weak to feed herself. Her hair was thin from lack of nutrition, but one day Alice Ann found a wooden comb and began to gently comb the woman's hair. And the woman looked for the first time as if she was actually seeing something and looked into Alice Ann's eyes and smiled. Well, that night, after prayers, Mother Teresa came over to Alice Ann and smiled at her and said, "I saw you today combing a loved one's hair, and you have seen the face of Christ in her." She said, "That is what you must do to survive here and to be Christ's disciple anywhere. You must love them, and to love, you must see the face of Christ in these whom others would not see at all." And then she concluded with, "God has blessed you today." Well, in a few more days, the woman died, and Alice Ann was overcome with grief. She knew that she was not helping. The one woman she was able to reach out to had died, and for several days Alice Ann was in tears any time someone wasn't looking at her. She was ready to go home. And again, Mother Teresa saw her and said, "I know you are in pain. That is to be expected. You see, love hurts. Jesus' love for us caused deep hurt to him, and so it will be with us always. But you will find that love will bring joy too. Joy for you, and because of you, joy for others." Well, Alice Ann eventually learned to accept both the hurt and the joy of love. Sometimes hundreds of people died every day in those dormitories for the dying. But people who visit there say there is no despair. There is a pervading sense of awe and holiness as the Sisters of Charity go from pallet to pallet and gently and lovingly care for the sick and dying, because each of those lying on the floor are Christ to those who serve them. Mother Teresa says, "It is the greatest of privileges to serve these beloved of God." Alice Ann came home after a semester and a summer in India. And before she left, Mother Teresa called her into her hot little room and sat her down in the same creaky chair that she had started in and said, "My dear, you believe you go home to a place where there is no poverty, at least not the dire poverty we have in India. But I tell you, I have been to America and there is great poverty. Some are hungry and sick, but many more have a poverty of spirit, and that is the gravest poverty of all. You must go home and work for God's beloved who are lonely and despairing and without faith. They are within even your family. So begin your work there and look for the face of Christ which rests on each of them." And that's what Alice Ann did. In the Gospel of John, the command to love is given first for the sake of Christian community. We are first to love each other, these brothers and sisters in this family. I read through the first brotherly agreement, which ordered the life among the brethren in Herrnhut. And it is a document which details how disputes will be handled, how businesses will be run, and how relationships are managed. And not just for the sake of good order and a pleasant society, it arises in part from a grand vision that if we can truly live out the love that Christ commanded and do it here, we can at least be one place on earth that bears concrete witness to the reign of God. Now, I'm not recommending that we return to that kind of community. My guess is today that it would be quickly perceived as a terrible combination of dictatorship and socialism. But I do believe that the church, this church, can be a witness to the world of the love of God for the world. And we start by loving one another as Christ loved us. When we do that, others on the outside will notice. One of the earliest written assessments of the early church was written by a Roman observer who said in the 2nd century, "See how they love one another." Well, you know that that's hard. Well, love is hard. We will struggle to be faithful, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. We will reclaim some and alienate others. We will heal and hurt. We will by turns be selfless and selfish, generous and stingy, obedient and willful. But don't despair. After Jesus gave the command to love each other, he said, "Remember, you did not choose me, but I chose you." You are the people of God, and it is God's doing, not yours. God has brought you to this place and made you who you are. And God will give you what it takes, including the faith itself, to be who you were called to be. A community of Christian love and a witness to the world of the love that God intends for the whole human race. Amen.